We are here for the BioRAFT EHS Community Connection webinar series, and the topic today is how to engage your scientists in safety. Right now, with COVID making a lot of scientists and personnel much more aware of the ways that safety impacts their own ability, not just to be safe and stay healthy, but also to just operate, to be in the lab space, to do science, to be on site. We have a rare opportunity to keep that engagement high, to build relationships, so that as things start to die down, whether or not we ever fully return to normal, we'll be able to exit out of this with a much stronger safety relationship and hopefully make our jobs a lot easier and make our personnel a lot safer and hopefully keep operations running smoothly. So we have with us today Becky, Divya, Partha, and Megan, and excited to have everybody on for our conversation. We've asked our panelists to share some takeaway goals that they can take with them, put into practice, for all of you. So we've got those up here, and we are going to get started with our presentation. During this, there will be an opportunity for all of you throughout the webinar to participate in our Q&A. So if you go over to your Zoom webinar control panel, you can click on the Q&A button, and that will launch the Q&A window. There you can ask questions. I think it's a much better place if you have a question you'd like answered than the chat. In the Q&A panel, you can respond to each other's questions. So we allow you to type responses, that way we're not bottlenecking all this information, right? It's not just about what we're talking about, it's about the back and forth between all of you. And then you can also thumbs up the questions you're most interested in. And that way we can just address the things the audience wants to hear about. A quick word of warning to our panelists. Unfortunately, Zoom, the way that it works, I'd recommend if you're interested in answering a question, go ahead and just click answer live. So that's just for our panelists. It'll make things a lot easier. And without any further ado, we are going to kick things off. So first question I have here is for you, Partha. I was wondering, what challenges do you encounter as a safety professional to create a positive culture of safety? And how important is leadership engagement to achieve this?
Thanks, Matt. Great question. So a constant challenge for any safety professional, in my opinion, is maintaining a compliant workplace while at the same time not losing the engagement level of the clients that we serve. In my experience, getting the full buy-in and support from leadership is critical to sustain the engagement with health and safety. And I have a few actionable takeaway items that, in my experience, to engage leadership effectively. The first one is to leverage policies and requirements of your organization to make lab heads accountable. So what do I mean by that? So for example, at Sanofi, we have a global health and safety policy that is signed by a CEO and is actually a key requirement for leadership to lead by example and take safety very seriously in labs. So in a university setting, I'm aware of similar policies that are issued, for example, the dean or the provost's office. So use these policies to your maximum leverage. Spread awareness about the existence of these policies through town halls, newsletters, blogs, whatever medium that works best for you to communicate these policies to your stakeholder groups. And I know that the NIH guidelines for use of recombinant DNA has a section on principal investigator responsibilities. And in a university setting, this would be most applicable as most universities, if not all, receive federal funding to make PIs aware of the enormous bearing that they have in setting the tone of the safety culture in their respective labs. The second action item that works really well in a pharma setting is programs like Gimbal Walks, where EHS teams typically walk with lab managers and get to know, sort of like from the boots on the ground, what are some of these safety issues that are there on the field. And I think this is a really good way to promote a positive safety culture, because in my opinion, a good safety culture starts at the top, and one cannot expect staff scientists to take safety more seriously than the lab head. The other point that I want to discuss is request meetings with leadership. It could be just for 15 minutes or be even like a quick elevator pitch to simply like go over inspection results, for example. And while in these leadership meetings, present broad trends in lab safety performance and solicit their feedback for improvement. And I think this truly helps to empower them to see through your eyes and become your powerful partner to help in your journey, to make safety culture a positive and a sustainable one. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. I love that perspective as well. Not just about leadership saying safety is important, but then to say, hey, you told me this was important, so now let me bring this information back to you to help bring you in to this conversation and not just have it be this one-time communication.
Absolutely.
Safety and leadership starts at the top in a lot of cases. So being able to have that greater engagement will definitely show your personnel, hey, this actually does matter and it's important.
Yep.
And, getting over to our next question here for Megan, I was wondering, how have you found that being able to relate to your scientists and personnel changes their willingness to engage with safety?
So I found that since I like to show that I come to them as knowing that this is about the research and we aren't there to stifle their research. We're there to help with the research. That the safety is about the research. So if we come to them with to help them, it's not to hurt them. So I like to work with them, and I'm in their labs a lot. So I talk to them about the research first, so that when I'm talking to them about the research, it's not that I come at them immediately about safety and compliance, so that the safety and compliance is, it's not secondary, but it's worked into their research so that it's all encompassing, so that they understand that it's not just me fighting with them. It's more an overall, it's worked into their overall projects, so that it's all worked in together, so that it's not, oh, we have to change what we're doing. No, it's all worked in together. The safety and compliance is part of your project. It's all together. And so since I was a PI and a grad student and a, director and a, chair, I was in their shoes at one time, regardless of what they're doing. I was in that position too. So it helps me to be, talk their language. So it's helpful because I know there's not always just one way to fix something. There's not just one way to solve these problems. So we can always be creative and do what needs to be done. So, we work to do whatever they're doing, and it's just helpful to come at them from their point of view, not necessarily a safety view, but a researcher view. And safety and compliance is there, but they don't necessarily get bombasted with the safety. It's snuck in, I guess.
Yeah, it's not an add-on. It's not like a compliance thing that's being pasted on top of the work and giving them an additional, set of tasks that they need to do that are just there to bother them. It's actually interwoven into their process to help make their jobs easier.
Right. So I'm constantly sticking my nose in their labs and being like, so here I am, always around. So yeah.
All right, fantastic. Becky, the next question is coming your way. I was wondering what first impressions, sorry, let me rephrase that. So first impressions can matter a great deal. What do you do to start the relationship with your scientists off on the right foot? And, you know, that's always a difficult thing when you don't always have the newest scientists coming in. So just being able to reframe that also in like, what can we do for the people who already know us?
Right. Yeah. And of course, someone started weed whacking right outside my window just a couple minutes ago. So hopefully you aren't hearing that background noise. But I think with what Partha and Megan said, that a theme is emerging of communication and relationships, right? And we all know, if you've been in safety any amount of time, that that's what it's all about. Communications, relationships. And sometimes the most important part of a relationship is how you start that relationship. So at UC Davis, we've put a lot of effort into our new faculty outreach program. And when I say we, my team member, Veronica Throne, is actually in attendance today. So it's mostly Veronica when I say we, that is boots on the ground doing this now. But Matt, you did say that it would be great if folks could take something concrete away from this webinar. And whenever I attend a webinar or a training, if I can get 1 or 2 kernels, I'm always really happy with that to take away. And I think that it's important if you are at a large university or even a small university, but Davis is quite large, it can be hard to get a handle on who is new and who is coming and going. And we really had to put some work into getting in those administrative levels to find out about the faculty hiring. And that was not easy, but we put the time in to make those connections, because some of that can be confidential. We do find out about folks long before they come in so that we can prepare to meet with them and make sure that we get them to commit to that hour to meet with us to build that relationship. You can either try to get that access, or you can also work with your folks that are out there in the field that know the comings and goings, and make sure that they know to contact you, to give you a heads up, so that you can start out before they've been here 6 months. You don't find out about them when they've already ordered all their chemicals. They've already started their work. You know, maybe they're already frustrated with their lab remodel or being delayed, or, you know, they don't have an iWatch nearby and they've been promised that their lab space is ready. Like the sooner you can find out any of those things. So I would say put in the work. If you don't have a good access to that, then be creative about how to get that. And then also a concrete thing can be just get a little budget for gifts and swag. People really like that, and they really remember it. And it's a very positive way to start out the relationship. And I've had many inspections go wrong over time. I've had many regulatory conversations go wrong over time, but I did the new faculty outreach for quite a while. And I've never had one be negative or even get on a negative note. They're always just a love fest. So I think really putting work into getting that program going is a great way, and just putting people in touch with resources. And like I said, at UC Davis, it's a large university. We have about 1,000 principal investigators. Veronica met with about 40 new faculty last year. So that's only 4 or 5% per year. But in 5 years, that's 25% of the faculty that you formed this positive relationship when you met them. So, and over 10 years, you know, you're looking at, especially with a generation, a lot of retirements coming up. And so it can just, I think that's just give them some gifts, tell them you're there for them, show them how to set up some technology things. We're doing it. Veronica pivoted quickly to all Zoom, all remote, which has proven to be very convenient for folks. So I think we might keep with that for most of them, because a lot of times they were so new, they didn't have an office, they didn't even have their computer set up. So now we just do it via Zoom. I think we're gonna make it as convenient as you can. And then we do a little follow-up too in a few weeks, and we make sure they get the gift bag, even though we're not handing it to them in person right away, but we follow up with that. And the effort that we put into that, which is can be a considerable amount of effort, is so worth it.
You know, I really liked what you said earlier about people sort of feeling upset or aggravated because maybe an iWatch station isn't present or working already. And I think a common thread I've seen is that our scientists and personnel don't understand that we don't know every single thing about their safety environment. You know, that it's not possible for us to be omniscient in that way, but because it's a safety thing or a logistical thing, they kind of expect that. And, you know, having these relationships, kind of showing them, okay, wait, tell me about your problems, let me help you, might help to stop some of that, you know, well, I had this problem and I didn't tell you about it, but, now I'm going to carry a resentment and let that just sort of eat into me.
Yeah, and it may be someone else entirely, but they think it's health and safety, so you can head it off for your colleagues that are in other departments that, go ahead and solve that problem, or at least the first step towards solving it, because it doesn't matter if you didn't cause it, they might associate safety, quote unquote, safety with the problem.
Great. So kind of moving on here to a little bit of the foundation of where we came from this webinar, looking at the ways that COVID has made everybody a lot more aware of and engaged in safety, and seeing, how we can take that momentum and then really intentionally turn that into sustainable grassroots safety culture and better relationships. Divya, this first question is going to come to you, and then I'm going to pass it along to Partha and Megan. I was wondering, what are your plans to help your scientists and personnel transition the current COVID-induced safety awareness into a more lasting relationship to safety?
Right. So I think if there's a flip side to this pandemic, right? There's an overall increased awareness of whether you call it EHS or safety in general. There's also an increased awareness that, one, we all do not know everything, right? I mean, the regulations keep changing, guidance keeps changing, and some of this is at a state level, federal level, and I know where some of our sites are even at a local, town level. There's a lot of things changing. So I think what it has helped is kind of come up with that whole safety is everyone's responsibility kind of mentality. I think we're making strides in the right direction overall. But I think in terms of specific, workable plans, and I'm sorry, that is my email in the background, which I'm going to silence. But in terms of specific plans, I think what has changed is fundamentally the way the workplace looks. We're all dealing with hybrid work environments where we're going to have a remote component, an in-person component, and we're trying to I'm not going to say in the middle, but we're trying to make all of the, please both set of customers. And it's all being in the biotech industry, it's all like science adjacent. So I think this is the perfect time to look at all of your policies. And again, engage with, and I'm going to kind of pick on what a theme that was, brought, that Partha introduced, and, Megan and Becky also kind of mentioned, which is to engage with your customer groups. So start at the leadership level saying, what does your site or what does your group need? So have that conversation going so that you can translate all of those, look at those policies and see whether they make sense. And it's kind of, going back to that change management, change it and edit it appropriately. So in terms of specific things, one of the things that we've looked at is, of course, there's the, the decon procedures that we have. We have QC labs where we're like, well, does this make sense now? Do we need to change anything? That is like just one subset. The other thing is a lot of our sites are reduced capacities, which I'm sure everyone is dealing with. So what does that mean in terms of scheduling to come on site and work in the labs? Are there, can you leverage technology and come up with specific scheduling tools? Can you make use of Outlook better? Is there any check-in, check-out system that you can use? Is it badge access? And all of these are, we have some sort of thing in place. But take a look at that and see how you can kind of weave that into, capacities being displayed in the labs, for example. The other thing is emergency action plans. They're going to look completely different because you have emergency coordinators, and your plan was written thinking that, okay, 100% of your workforce, your lab workforce, or is going to be on site. And this is something, and when the fire alarm goes off, everybody knows where to go, but that has not, things like that, there's going to be changes. So it might not be a bad idea to revisit what that looks like for your, the location that we are. The other thing is, and I think I may have brought this up before, which is also what does it mean if you have lone worker policies in place? That's changed as well. So kind of looking at that in terms of actual things that you can take away, I would urge people to look at those plans and alter them for the new normal, whatever that looks like, but it's going to be a hybrid kind of thing.
Yeah, I really love that perspective of saying, wait, let's reassess here. Everything's different. Things might not be the same. We have the time and the opportunity to take a rare moment to, again, reassess what do we have in place and why. What is the point of these things? Can we make them better? Can we get feedback from somebody? Have these been legacy maybe from a time before the internet? Like we were talking about before, how many of these things just continued because they had no reason not to, and we never had a chance to stop doing them to reassess. I think one of the reasons that I'm sorry, you're going to go?
Yeah, and I think the nice part is, and kind of keeping it with theme, is now we have the chance to engage with our stakeholders or customers and actually bring them in and to really, and how often do we get a chance to do that, right? Because those are corporate level policies or, system-wide policies that are written. But now we actually have a chance to go and come up with something that is collaborative.
Yeah, exactly. People are really listening now. And we also have a rare opportunity. Again, I said this a little bit earlier on a previous webinar about health and safety after the vaccine. It's not often where you can look to the future, 4, 6, 8 months out and be pretty confident about major changes and trends that are going to come that aren't here yet, and be able to anticipate that. So being able to build something and be prepared for that moment will let you have a much greater effect than just constantly being on the back foot and reacting. And Partha, the same question for you as well. So what ways are you planning on helping your scientific and personnel adapt and take some of this safety engagement from COVID and transition that into a more sustainable relationship?
Thanks, man. Yeah, as Divya mentioned, COVID has caused a major disruption to the way we think about lab safety. And the points I want to discuss is more behavior-based, as opposed to more of organizational changes that Divya mentioned. The first one is focusing on awareness of this hand-to-face touching or HTF behaviors. So all of us unconsciously touch our faces, and according to one study, we all do it on an average of 23 times an hour. So this is, I feel, an important route for transmission of pathogens, not just SARS-CoV-2, especially when you touch your T-zone. So this is the zone that's between your eyes, nose and mouth, which is rich in mucous membrane surfaces. And I'm hoping the conscious habit to reduce these HTF behaviors will persist after the pandemic. The second point I want to talk about is COVID has brought into focus the importance of Formic-based transmission, especially considering the huge investment all of us have made into, regularly cleaning high-touch surfaces, especially. And this is something I think is very important to reduce workplace transmission of agents, especially if, your lab works with human pathogens, and also is highlighted, especially during flu season, and to make sure that these high-touch surfaces are regularly disinfected, and the important habit of hand washing becomes an automatic behavior, especially when you take off PPE like gloves in the lab. The third really important point I want to discuss is making sure people stay at home when they're sick. So I want to introduce the term presenteeism, which is defined as the opposite of absenteeism, where people actually show up to work when they shouldn't be at work. And presenteeism actually is a much bigger problem than absenteeism because it's largely invisible, and the effects of presenteeism is very difficult to quantify. And there are countless studies to show that presenteeism is much costlier than absenteeism. And the strong messaging that we have sent over the last year is to stay at home, work with your manager, find alternate ways of working, and not coming to work when you're sick. And this is especially a problem in healthcare because there is a strong stigma against calling out sick, and the expectation or the culture demands you to be a trooper, show at work when you're sick. And I think it was in one of the large universities in California where earlier on in the pandemic that we actually saw cases exploding just because doctors and nurses came to work when they were infected themselves. So these are essentially my 3 takeaway messages of transitioning to a workplace post-COVID.
And Megan, same question to you. Are there any particular actionable things that you are working on to try and transition some of this COVID safety momentum into a more lasting change?
Yes. One of the things that, well, two of the things that I've done doing, I created a team site for our biosafety. We don't have the greatest website, so I created a team site for biosafety where my labs can find essentially anything they ever wanted to know about biosafety. So they can find everything, websites for information, templates for things, posters and signage so that they can label things in their labs. So it's a one-stop shop for everything safety related. And then also there is a movement to attempt to get all of our labs to have lab-specific safety manuals. Prior to this, only our BSL-2 and 2 labs had safety manuals. And I am working diligently on getting our other labs to finally get safety manuals. And so so now I'm trying to get our other labs to do risk assessments and develop SOPs for their labs as well. And so this is obviously a really large undertaking, since it's not the smallest endeavor to get risk assessments and SOPs for all of the labs, but it's a goal.
And it's one that actually they appreciate and can see the work being put in and see, oh, this is actually here to help me and not just another compliance checkbox being marked.
Right. And I've done a lot of the work for them. So and a lot of them do see that. So the baseline is there for them already. So, but yeah, it's at least they see where it's coming from. So that's good.
Yeah, I think that's a great point as well. Just getting back to, I think what Becky mentioned earlier about that iWatch station not being seen, and then suddenly then we was like, wait, you don't know everything about what's going on everywhere. Maybe our scientists and personnel don't understand just how much work goes into some of the basics of safety, of making sure that not only are the iWatch stations functional, but in the rare event that they ever need it, they're not going to walk away with a terrible eye infection afterwards. And just being able to show some of that work and help them see, okay, there's a lot of care here. There's a lot of work being done that I'm not understanding. COVID has maybe made that a little bit more apparent. And now you get a chance to say, hey, you're believing that we do this. Let me show you all the other stuff we do. And then again, you start to establish some of that credibility that might, again, create some of this better relationship.
Yeah.
And coming up next, our question after this is for Becky, moving on to some of our other panelists afterwards. So could you tell us about a particularly successful safety initiative that you put into place? And then what do you think made it successful instead of having it land flat? And then especially, in the context of how it might have built up more of a relationship between your scientists and personnel to your safety program.
Yeah, I'm still thinking over Partha's touching the T-zone and being traumatized, thinking back to early in the pandemic when we were all trying not to touch our faces. I consider my house as like a safe zone for face touching, but other than that, no. But yeah, for successful initiatives, we have instituted a lab safety awards program at UC Davis. We're entering into our 3rd year of that. And it's, again, looking for that way to create a positive safety interaction and reinforce the positive aspects of a safety culture, because we still always will have compliance and inspections and violations and all those things. But to just really shift the conversation in a positive way is our goal. And so we've started to award lab safety. And I think one thing that made it successful is that there are a million ways to give out an award. But what I did is I asked my colleagues at UC Berkeley who already had lab safety awards, how did they calculate it? And we've specified it a little bit for Davis, but it's kind of like, if you're doing these kinds of things, there's a million ways to crunch the numbers. And so I did with what someone else was already doing successfully. So I take all the data I have from that my colleague Veronica's lab safety team gathers. And we crunch the numbers, we come up with some awardees. I was able to get a budget for some money. We partnered with that was a successful partnership with some other departments, going with them hat in hand to ask if they would help fund this positive safety initiative. So our grand prize winner does get $5,000. And that was at the suggestion of a faculty member. He said, you know what, it would be nice to get some money along with this when we were forming it. And I thought, well, we're poor, we don't have any money, but we went around, we cobbled it together. I haven't had to do any bake sales yet, but maybe. We did it in person. We gave people a luncheon. We feted them. We celebrated, and that was before COVID. And then we changed it to virtual. We got our chancellor involved. He did a little taped message. So I think it was successful. And then I got some publicity out of it in our campus newsletters. So it was successful, giving a little glitz and glamour and celebration with really overall not that much of a budget commitment. And so we're making a tradition now. We're entering, and we change it a little bit every year. We're looking to expand it eventually to maybe other areas, non-lab areas, field research. There's really a lot of places that we could go with it. So I think just building on what others have done and asking for input and not starting from scratch, and then taking it to faculty and asking for their input and keeping it positive has made it a successful initiative that we're going to continue.
I think it's so interesting figuring out how to structure these rewards, because you really get different behaviors coming out of these things, whether you want that big lump sum of money or offering a meal. Sometimes it's, better to have those many, $5 gift cards instead of one $50 gift card or something. And it seems like that sum sounds very impressive to me, right? That's something where you think, oh, that's a whole new piece of equipment for me, like, dang. And then of course, the larger amount, might get people elsewhere at your organization saying, wait a second, we got to make sure this is serious. Like, I'm putting money in here. You guys are going to work as hard as you can, because I want this to end up in my department.
Yeah, we're hoping that over time the word grows and we want to activate that spirit of competition. So I think we're still working on that. The winners are very appreciative, but we do offer extra credit campus-wide as well. And the participation has been very low traditionally in the first 2 years. So that's really a goal of mine, is to get more folks submitting extra credit, because then they're competing, they're trying to get in there. It's not just through their lab audit. So I have some ideas about this year. All the semifinalists are going to be encouraged to submit extra credit. And we have quite a few semifinalists. So I'm doing a little more personalized outreach to try and get more than like 10 extra credit submissions for the campus. So we just once you've got it established, then you just can keep tweaking it and having some fun.
Partha, looks like you have something to add on there.
Oh, sure. So the initiative I was going to talk about is very similar to what Becky has mentioned, but I wish we could give out $5,000. But my philosophy has always been to promote a good safety culture. You need to have a no blame, no fault culture where everyone feels accountable for safety. And the safety initiative that we put into place was something called a Good Catch Rewards program. And essentially this involved turning all the staff at site into extended years for health and safety, motivated with the prospect of a reward and public recognition. And this happened once every quarter. So anytime basically a person reports an unsafe condition that could easily cost an incident, that would qualify them for a good catch observation reward. And as I said, it's not a pot of money we're talking about. Is usually something called Sanofi reward points, or if you have a contractor, it would be, through their contracting organization, could be even like, vacation time, all sorts of rewards. So initially, we had a formal, like an intake form or like a card, which we, asked people to fill out. And very soon we realized that, asking folks to fill out that card itself was like an impediment. So we got rid of that. And since my site is a really small site, and we just relied essentially on, word of mouth reporting. People just will come to my office and say, hey, Partha, this is something that I saw, and I want to report this. And I would just quickly type it up essentially that would be the documentation that a good catch observation was submitted. And getting rid of that single step alone made a huge improvement in the number of safety observations that were submitted on a quarterly basis. We have several lagging indicators and leading indicators on site, and this is a really good example of a good leading indicator as opposed to a lagging indicator. And the very fact that it is a leading indicator really helped us to bolster the safety culture of the site. Because we were rewarding the right behaviors. Because, for example, if we had rewarded wrong behaviors, like give awards for 0 accidents, for example, now that easily could have backfired on the site, as we saw with several high-profile safety incidents, like the Deepwater Horizon tragedy that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, where BP essentially rewarded not reporting rewarded the 0 accident at site. And there's several places still which give out rewards for 0 sick days, 0 accidents. And I feel it's really important that you reward the right behaviors and choose the right behaviors carefully, before creating a rewards program. That's my take on the successful safety initiative, Matt. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I liked what you said earlier as well about removing a step in the process and then suddenly seeing a huge uptick. I mean, we live in a over-communicated, very complicated, honestly exhausting society right now with the internet and with people working remotely, just generally being very busy and distracted. And being able to super simplify those processes can have much greater results than you'd expect in many cases.
Thanks.
I really like calling it a good catch too. I have a team member who does that as well, rather than a near miss. And I think that it's just striking because I'm just starting to hear that, but I really like it.
Yeah, so actually we distinguish between a near miss and a good catch, and we actually classify near miss as a lagging indicator because it's something that incident has already happened. It's just that and nothing serious happened because of a lucky set of circumstances, right? So that's how we distinguish between a good catch and a near miss.
It also is a kind of a reward in and of itself, right? A near miss feels like it's still a failure, right? But a good catch, exactly. Even when you hear that, it's nice to get that little rush of neurochemical reward. Say, yeah, I did something right. All right, pat on the back. People are recognizing me. I did something impressive.
Yeah, and it's completely no blame, no fault. No one ends up looking silly or anything like that. It's just it's a good feeling overall for everyone.
Great. Moving on here to our next panelist to weigh in on this topic, Divya, could you tell us about a particularly successful safety initiative, and then why you think it might have been successful instead of falling flat, and particularly around how it might have built out and improved the relationship of safety and the personnel and scientists?
I was going to say talk about the Good Saves program, but then I think, we have something similar. So I'm going to touch on something else. One of the other initiatives that we did was kind of look at site safety goals, make that a collaborative process. So we leveraged heavily, we have safety committees. So essentially kind of having the safety committee figure out what are the safety goals for this, for the site for a specific year, and actually factor that the fact that people were spending a certain amount of time by being on the safety committee into their individual goals. So it's almost like you have your whatever set of goals, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people are putting in a significant percentage of their time towards the safety committee and kind of, driving those initiatives forward. So doing that as well. So that way they're getting rewarded at a performance level as well for stepping up, so to speak. But we do have, the other thing that we have is we have a Good Saves program as well. And one of the key things that we had to do was to kind of differentiate. There were a lot of people who didn't know the difference between a near miss and a good save. So it's almost like, and I think the example that we literally kind of used was if you see like a bulge on the carpet and someone almost trips on it, then that's a near miss. But then if you see it, or if you feel like something is not done properly, then that's a good safe. And a lot of times I think the people would, it's some interesting discussions on what is a near miss versus a good safe. So what we have is we also have a tiered approach in terms of what those awards are, what they look like. I mean, it's not 5,000. I wish again that we had the budget to go for a $5,000 level, but it's more, it depends on what the impact was. So we look at the potential impact, and that's how it's structured in terms of the Good Safe program itself, what the impact of that, of reporting that would be. Again, the push is towards, several times I also get asked the same question of, can we set aside goal of, this many recordable injuries, or bringing down the recordable injury rate by a certain level, but that's kind of, and it always comes back to, no, this is a lagging indicator. And really we want people to report as much as possible.
You mentioned having increased engagement on the safety committee. Were there any steps that you took along the way to make sure that that safety committee really, met the needs of your scientists and also kind of got them engaged and active? I know that that's a common thing that exists in a lot of organizations, but sometimes the safety committee can be kind of a dreaded dead zone.
Yeah, so I think the point, one of the approaches that we took was to say that EHS is really a facilitator, that it's more led by the labs, the groups themselves. We're simply there to facilitate and help things move along, but that the bulk of it is definitely led by the people that work in the labs. So one of the things that we've done is, a lot of the times our checklists were the standard list that came out of initially in the EHS management software that we use. It was, or paper checklists that people come up with. So then kind of engaging with the labs and saying, okay, this is the list of questions. Do you have any edits? Does this make sense? And coming up with a consolidated checklist for audits. And also one of the things that we did was we came up with a COVID inspection checklist, because there's not people over there. So, tailoring that, saying that we're getting meaningful data out of it, but at the same time, it is, there is always going to be a little bit of a regulatory component, but let's kind of make it as collaborative as possible. So I find that approach has helped with my tougher groups of, or some of the stakeholders who can be a little bit stubborn.
Great, I'm glad to hear that that's been working for you. Well, we are blazing through time here, so we're going to switch over to our live Q&A in just a moment. Quick reminder to everybody, now is a great time to go into the Q&A button over in our Zoom webinar control panel. Ask your questions, respond to each other's if you see something interesting you'd like more details, thumbs up the things you're most interested in. And a quick plug for our upcoming webinars. Coming soon, we are going to have a few here. And before I get into that, I'm also going to launch a quick poll. So these are, as many of you know, the EHS Community Connection webinars. We rely heavily on you, our community, to let us know what you're interested in, what topics you'd like to see coming up. We want these to stay relevant and interesting for everybody. And we also want to keep them going. And that means that we also need panelists. It is something that we try to keep very lightweight and easy for people to do, so it's simple to participate. And a huge thank you to our current panelists for spending their time and energy to come here today and to make this space for us to have this conversation. These are a really wonderful chance to show off what your organization is doing for safety, and also to just get some confirmation that, yeah, even if it feels like you're not entirely sure, in fact, you're doing a really great job here. So go ahead, let us know whether you'd like to participate in a future one, if you know somebody in your network, what topics you'd like to see, and whether you'd like to join us for next week's drop-in session, where myself and Jonathan Klein will just be answering some questions one-on-one, having conversations, getting to have a little bit more back and forth than we do here, where it's more of a, somebody asks a question, we answer it, and then move on. Coming up, we've got breaking down internal barriers to safety in 2 weeks. After that, peroxide formers, talking about tracking and disposing of that particularly fun class of chemicals. And then a very exciting topic for me here, talking about reopening full scientific operations. It's coming. What can we do to be prepared for that big event? There will be new challenges. There will be old challenges, but it's better to be prepared than just sort of have it sneak up on you and end up on the back foot again. So without any further ado, we're going to move on to our Q&A here. I know that Becky has to leave pretty soon in about 10 minutes. So we're going to start off by focusing on a few of these questions directed towards the Lab Safety Award program. So Becky, first question here from Mary asking, what types of activities received this $5,000 reward?
In this case, it's the grand prize winner. So we have different areas of campus. And so we give out 6 prizes overall, and then we pick one grand prize winner out of that. So they receive the lion's share. We have had individual deans contribute for some of their areas so we've had smaller prizes. And so, yeah, it's just, I would love for each winner to win something, but so far not all of the deans have felt like they have the funds. And I don't think COVID-19 is gonna make them feel like they have more cash available. So luckily we do have that continued commitment for the grand prize.
Fantastic. And then how did you, another follow-up question there, how did you get more people involved in funding this award? So did you overcome any objections or sort of?
Yeah, I kind of, once we had the engineering dean led the way. She actually volunteered it after the first year when she attended. She had a lot of fun. Then we kind of used that leverage to solicit the other heads, you know, hey, this person did it, but it actually, that didn't work. So it was just the one. And it was just her individual commitment, but we just come out and ask, we just say, I have the leadership of my department. So a couple levels above me and like of leadership levels. So they're talking to their peers, and I just write an email and have him send it explaining and just asking, can you match this commitment? And just try it that way. All they can do is say no.
We're actually going to be creating a series of content coming up soon, asking about how do you get funding for the safety initiatives you want. But a big part of that is being strategic, thinking really hard, not just sending out an email to everybody saying, hey, can I have some money? Can I have some money? You don't get to ask that question a lot of times to the same person. Yeah. So going in a specific order, saying who's going to be most likely, who's going to influence. Maybe I have somebody who I don't have a great relationship with, but I know if I get them, I'm going to have 4 other people also. So thinking about it that way can really make a big difference. Then moving on here, just another question about these safety awards. What kind of extra credit ideas do you use for the award system for those people who might not feel like they're eligible for the grand prize?
Right, we've had research ramp down because it was happening last year during COVID-19. So how to ramp it down safely. We did that. We've had lab cleanup, show us the before and after pictures. We've had tell us about your successful safety initiative. Like the grand prize winner had created a safety Jeopardy and they sent us a little video. And so along those lines, we try and make sure every type of lab has the chance to participate, and we let them know, hey, look, if you start out with a clean lab, we're not looking to see a trashed lab to a clean lab. So just, it's more about telling us about your journey to lab housekeeping rather than a shocking before and after. So we try and make sure every type of lab can participate. And this year we're looking to tweak it, like I said, to have the semifinalists, to target them so that they know you already have a good chance. So put yourself over the top. And then we also have had the idea to have one that's specific to principal investigators to try and get the faculty or PIs involved. So I don't know if they'll be willing. It would have to definitely be easy because they're very busy, or it would have to be fast. So those are some other ideas we've had.
Fantastic. Moving on to our next question here. Looks like Divya would like to answer one here from Laurel, asking, how are you conducting in-person lab inspections during the pandemic? We have capacity limits, which make it more difficult.
Sure. So what we did was we altered our lab inspection checklist to come up with the COVID-specific ones to really, pare down the number of questions so that the time that was spent on site would be minimal. We also booked the time in advance, pulled up results from previous inspections, so we can kind of identify and get trends of what some of the either what are the absolute priorities from either a regulatory, which had a compliance aspect associated with it, or previous things that we'd noticed in the lab. So we heavily leveraged on those two, but it was a pared down specific COVID checklist, just in light of the fact that we couldn't, we couldn't do the full-on inspections. And I think there was another question underneath about I forget, it was a two-parter, I think. I don't know if that's,
Looks like a follow-up, maybe. How
oh yeah,
regularly
there was
you
a
inspect?
couple of things. I'll just, I mean, how regular, generally we inspect every month. It depends on what the inspection is, right? So I'm not gonna obviously cover the waste checks, etc. But we inspect every month.
All right, great. Moving on here to a question from Joe, asking, how do you encourage trickle-down safety? You know, admin, PI, student, or any other sort of hierarchical structure in large departments where the admin or the person, you know, sort of at that top there, are reluctant to participate and push these things at the PI level, or that, you know, sort of intermediate group lead. Is this something that any of you have encountered, where maybe you're getting some of that resistance from the people higher up who should be hopefully, you know, providing some of this leadership momentum? All right, well, this is one of my favorite parts of the series, which is, this is a community connection webinar here. You know, these are, this is a group of people, our audience, who are all safety professionals who have a, gosh, I'd love to know one day roughly how much our audience has in terms of total combined years of safety knowledge. It's probably immense. So feel free, if you have experience with this challenge, if you have some issues you've resolved, to go ahead and jump into the Q&A and help Joe out. You know, we don't have all the answers. That's not what this is really about. This is about bringing everybody together to help share information and not have it just be, you know, really bottlenecked at a bunch of us talking at you. So we'll leave that one up for everybody. If you have something to add, please definitely don't worry about not knowing enough, not having enough, you know, information or experience. You know, your experiences are valuable and will be helpful for others. So definitely encourage anyone to go ahead and weigh in there on our Q&A.
Just one point for clarification. I'm just wondering, why have an admin participate in these safety meetings in the first place? Because a principal investigator ideally should be having a person who has skin in the game participate in these meetings rather than an admin person who, you know, is going to sit at his or her desk all day long. So that's my take on this, not to have an admin person and push this off and an admin person to take care of you know, this trickling down safety. It should be like a lab manager or a fairly senior person in the lab, you know, again, who has skin in the game, who should be participating in these meetings.
And also a big thank you to Jill and AJ for chiming in on this one and helping out. I really love to see that. Moving on here to another question, Partha, you mentioned wanting to answer this one from AJ. So AJ asks, how do you engage in biorisk mitigation strategies in a BSL-2 or even BSL-1 laboratory versus a higher level of containment where the inherent risks are more apparent or easier to communicate? And it looked like AJ was wanting input from this from both Partha and Megan.
Yeah, that's a great question, AJ. So at Sanofi, we have something called a task-based risk assessment exercise. So essentially what happens is, let's say there's a lab of 6 people working on you know, a typical BL2 type of environment. We get together, the entire group, and we break down the list of tasks that they perform, starting from the time that they, you know, receive a sample, example, you know, RG2 influenza, like a vaccine strain of influenza, for example. So the minute they receive it, they aliquot it, and we list all the steps down, and we have the entire group participate in that exercise. And every single time I've done this exercise, there is something new that comes out. And a lot of times, you know, it sort of forces the scientists to think about the steps that they haven't even thought about it before. And, you know, there was a time where people were ordering glass ampules from ATCC, and you know, one of the suggestions was, you know, why not just shift to, you know, do away with these glass ampules and shift to you know, disposable plastic ones. And just this one example where I feel getting together this group and participating in a live risk-based task assessment exercise and computing a score for each task, and then coming up with all sorts of creative ways to lower down your score for each task. I think that's a great way to disseminate risk mitigation strategies, especially for BL2 and even BL1.
I love that focus on risk assessments and how these sometimes obvious seeming details can come out when you actually go through the steps. I had a conversation with a future panelist who will be on for our peroxide formers training, where she was talking about somebody who was going to be putting a hazardous, potentially explosive material through, I think, a roller ball mill was the term she used, and just hadn't thought about it. But then when you go through it step by step in that environment, it can help unearth things. And what's particularly effective is when the person doing it makes the realization. If you tell them that, they say, oh, that's a great point. But when they realize it, that's when it kind of makes those neural pathways and really sticks for longer. Megan, did you have something to add here?
Yeah, and a lot of like, for instance, my researchers in BSL1 labs, they think, oh, it's a BSL1 lab. We don't have anything. And then I go through their chemical inventory and they're like, oh, well, I have, diethyl ether, and I have, these other hazardous chemicals. And then I'm doing these, as Partha said, I'm doing these procedures, and they have plenty of things that when you actually do the risk assessment, they're doing plenty of risky procedures that they never even took into account. That, yeah, you are doing plenty of things that are risky that they never even thought about in their no hazards BSL1 lab. So as we're doing these risk assessments, it's like, yeah, there are risks in a BSL1 lab. So yeah, that they never even considered, because they never sat down and actually thought about what they've done, what they're doing in their labs. So yeah, it's important to actually think about step by step and what's actually in your lab and what you're doing in your lab.
We are here at 4 p.m. Eastern time, right around when our webinar is scheduled to end. And as usual, we've got a good number of more questions than we can actually handle within the hour. So we've already had Becky who had to jump here. And of course, if any of the rest of our panelists need to go, a huge thank you quickly to all of you for spending your time here. This has been a fantastic discussion, and I think a lot of really useful information that you can really take away and change your activities with. And of course, if you're able to stay on for the next 12 or so minutes, we can still spend that time answering more questions. And if you need to jump, no problem. I really appreciate your time here. All right, great. Well, let's move on here to our next question here from Jim. Jim wants to know how to diffuse an angry PI after an audit. Could you chart a road ahead? And of course, expanding that to probably an angry anyone, or, particularly maybe some of these people who might be angry and in a more administrative role where they're not the person on the ground failing, but rather they have people sort of under their purview who have been more involved in the activities that have led to these findings. Megan?
Sure. I had the unfortunate experience within the first 3 months of joining UNT of having to shut down a lab. So yeah, very angry PI. And so I think it's important to work really closely and just work really closely with them on how to, as quickly and easily, fix whatever needs to be fixed, and just tell them that you'll work with them and fix things. It's just to be as understanding and know that the anger comes from frustration, typically. So to diffuse, they're really just frustrated, and that's typically where the anger comes from. So typically they aren't trying to be, they aren't trying to be non-compliant. So they aren't trying to, you know, not do what they're not supposed to do. So at least usually. So yeah, you just have to accept that they aren't, you know, trying to be annoying people. So, and you have to get thick skin. I was a CDC inspector, so I had fairly thick skin because people never wanted to see me show up at their institutions when I showed up. So they always were upset when they saw us coming. So I already had pretty thick skin coming here. But so yeah, you just have to, you know, be very understanding and just, okay, accept that, you know, they're going to yell at you and be like, okay, just be the bigger person and say, how can we make this better? And what can I do to help you make this better? And, you know, work with them to make them happy. And remember that they're your customer, and work with them.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's something similar. So for me, I've had, so I obviously, I've had situations where, you know, sometimes not PIs necessarily, but you know, lab heads have been surprised by the number of CAPAs that are corrective and preventative actions that come out, and because I think their main concern is, well, how does my site compare to, like, you know, the other ones? Am I going to be put on some sort of remedial plan? I think that's the big fear. I think they just don't want to look bad when you compare findings across the organization or you know, various locations. So I think for me, it's again kind of touching on what Megan said. It's solutions. Provide solutions. This is the problem. Yep, and then kind of focus less on what the problem is rather than this is what it is. Here are the solutions. Which one is the best one, and then actually come up with an action plan for that, and really detail what that action plan looks like. I think I find that I'm not going to say that, you know, let's face it, if we could win popularity contests, I don't think EHS would be very high on that list. But you know, it's one of those things where I find that it does diffuse the situation somewhat. It's coming up with an actionable problem and not just saying, hey, this is your problem, fix it.
And I think that in addition to that, this kind of classic communication reframe of it's you and me against the problem of your lab space operations being shut down. I want to help you keep these things going. I don't want this to happen for you. And especially when it comes to, you know, like you said, CAPAs, findings, issues, especially for a group lead like a PI who may be more administrative, isn't in the lab anymore. In a lot of cases, I think it's the road from researcher to PI is bad. You take somebody who excels at research and put them in an administrative role where they're not doing research. They miss that and they feel defensive about the people who are working for them not adhering to these things. And when they get defensive, it makes it harder for them to communicate. They might refuse what you're saying. They might get angry at you. So figuring out how you can just de-escalate that, practice nonviolent communication and kind of say, hey, it's okay. Like, you're not a bad person because these things are happened. Your researchers aren't bad. This isn't your fault. Getting away from that might help to help calm some of those feelings. And then again, that enables you to work towards a solution. Divya, like you mentioned, instead of focusing just on the problem, which just feels bad to everyone, it sort of turns us into more safety officers rather than safety solution providers. Partha, did you have something that you wanted to add to that one?
Sure. So just like Megan, I also had the unfortunate experience of dealing with the angry PI, and the issue here was the lab was a serial mouth pipetting laboratory, and yeah, this is one of those really old school labs, you know, dealing with fruit fly embryology. So they were mouth pipetting fruit flies and essentially patch clamping on the eggs. So essentially, when I talked to the PI and I told them that, you know, mouth pipetting is a big no-no, you know, the counter argument is a classic argument that everyone in a university has heard of, that I've been doing this for the last 30 years, and I'm really successful at it. And there were even a few Nobel laureates in that department I've worked. And essentially, who are you to tell me that I can't mouth pipe it? So essentially, that was the crux of the argument. And the PI was very flustered, and I had to handle this very delicately because a very high-profile department with a lot at stake. So essentially, the way I sold the solution is, 30 years back, our knowledge, the risks, are essentially could be the same, but our knowledge is very different of how we deal with those risks and how we look at those risks and how we handle those risks. So, and I propose there's so many solutions like, automated pipetters that are available that, completely do away the need for mouth pipetting. And there's so many alternatives available. And essentially, when I propose that, we actually provide a prototype to the lab of using an alternative solution and see as like a pilot project whether that solution would work for the lab. That was sort of like an act of goodwill to the lab, and that was one way I was able to convince the group to stay away from mouth pipetting and adopt to other better ways of injecting Drosophila eggs. Yeah.
Right. Well, before we head out here, just one quick question for the three of you. It looks like Megan's typing an answer now. From Juliana, wondering, can you describe the size of your department? So just how many folks do you have actually there working with you, helping you in safety?
There's, for me, there's my biosafety office is an office of one, and EHS, there's, I guess, 7 total. And yes, we have a campus of 41,000. So yeah.
I can go next. It's 4 for us, and one of them is an occupational health nurse. But then across, this is just for my site, the site that I'm responsible for.
Mine is a really small site. I serve as the health and safety manager and the biosafety officer. I'm supported by a part-time consultant from Safety Partners. But that's just for Cambridge, but separate for Orlando. They have a separate team as well.
Sounds like a pretty classic, just when you look at it, managing a ton with a small team here. So thank you for sharing all of that information with us. And we have 2 more minutes. Is there anything left that any of you would like to share? Any takeaways, parting thoughts, things that have come up as we've talked that, maybe new ideas? You can also take a look at our word cloud here and kind of see where everybody's at. Seeing a lot of overwhelmed, tired, vaccinated, busy, but still, also grateful, hopeful, warm, feeling good. All right. Well, we are going to wrap things up here. A huge thank you to everybody who has come on, joined, participated in our Q&A, lent all your advice. It's really nice to see, in the situations where somebody does ask a little bit of a stumper, people weigh in and come out of the woodwork there. So a huge thank you to everybody for joining us. Hope to see you on for a future webinar. We've got a bunch of good ones coming up, and I will talk with you all later, and have a great weekend.